Let's see here. Did I bring that up? I may have to grab a question. If you noticed on your questions that I gave you last week, you were probably only able to fill out the first few. And that's because we didn't get through it all. Surprise, surprise, right? So if you did them all, then you get a star. Not just a star on your paper, I'm sure a star up there too. So you get a star because we didn't really go over the second half of the question list. We will do that this week. And so I'm only going to take us down through maybe 4 because we didn't really get through the whole story of David. I just was able to touch on it, get through the part where he is made king and goes in and takes Jerusalem from the Jebusites that are living there. And then we stopped. We didn't get any further. So I'm only going to go down through number 4, and then the rest of it we can fill out this week. And you may even want to change your answers. Who knows if you filled it out. And then I have a couple here on Solomon. Today, my hope and desire is to finish with David and get through and go to Solomon and do our study on Solomon. And then next week, we should be able to get through the final portion of the foundation of the history of Israel and actually begin to study on our prophets. So that's the goal. We'll see. It may take us one more week after that. Who knows? But we'll see. All right. So let's just start with our first one. Who was the first king of Israel? Saul. Now, why was Saul chosen to be the king? He was tall and handsome. Say that again. Okay. So the Israelite people demanded a king, didn't they? Can you tell me why they would want a king? Everybody else had a king. And who was it that was going to be their king had they not chosen a man? God. God's desire was to be the king over his people. And so they're the ones that demanded a man. They're the ones that wanted someone else so that they would look like all of the other nations. So would you say, based on what we studied last week, that he was a good king? For the most part, no. And why would you say that? And you can add into what was his history with David. Why would you say he wasn't a good king? He was jealous. He was fearful because he knew that his kingdom was in jeopardy. Absolutely, he was fearful. Anyone else? Yes. Okay. He did not obey the Lord twice, specifically, probably more than that, but those two caused the Lord to come down and give judgment to him. What else? Anything else you can think of? Tried to kill David, hunted after David, sent David into to be a fugitive for over 10 years. Okay, so gave him a woman and then took her back. All right, so Michal, he gave his daughter to David as a wife and then took her back when he was upset. That's not good. So based on the story, based on the details that were given, he was likely, you would not put him in the category as being a good king. So number 2, which prophet anointed the first king of Israel? Samuel, and we talked quite a bit about Samuel. Do you remember me telling you at least one incredible thing or one important, interesting thing about Samuel?
He was raised by his mother gave him to the priest when he was 5.
Is that?
She had prayed for a child and said, if you give me one, I will give him back to you.
Is that amazing? Is that an amazing story of Hannah and her love and for God and taking this 5-year-old child, Samuel, and turning him over to Eli the priest as an offering to the Lord. I mean, it doesn't register with us because that's not our culture and that's not our society, but it certainly helps us to further understand this idea that God has a plan and a purpose for everyone and already knows how that's going to be accomplished. And so that child that Hannah was praying for, God already knew that it was going to be Samuel and that Samuel was going to come and the role that Samuel was going to play in the history of Israel. And so once again, we see that all-knowing God, that omnipotent God creating this history that in his eyes has already been played out. It's just another example, Patty.
And I think I was reading forward, and she went on to have other children.
Yes.
So God blessed her immensely.
Yes. Yes. Isn't that just awesome? I'm glad you pointed that out. That's exactly right. All right. So how is David introduced to the king? I didn't put his name in here because then, you would have the answer to number one. But to King Saul, how is David introduced to King Saul? As a harp player. Okay, so you mentioned the word nervous. Do you remember what we talked about last week with Saul? Mental illness, because it says a distressing spirit from the Lord came to Saul, and because Saul had done those things that had displeased the Lord, and the Lord had already told him that his kingdom was going to be removed from him, even though it didn't happen immediately. We have to remember that. He continues to go on and be the king of Israel for quite a period after that. But the Lord sends a distressing spirit. And as we see the things that he did, we recognize it's mental illness. Right? He tries to kill a son. He tries to kill David. He does incredible things that you don't do when you're in the right frame of mind. But God allowed this to happen. And so when David, the harpist, as Carrie said, would come and play his music, God created a situation where that calmed that demonic presence, or that distressing spirit, maybe would be the better word for that. That distressing spirit that fell upon him, that was able to calm him down. Now, that doesn't mean that harp music is going to solve every problem for everybody, but it certainly does mean that God had his hand in that, and that was how he was going to first initially connect David and Saul together. All right, number 4, why did God regret placing Saul as king? What are the things he had done?
He was told to completely annihilate the Amalekites when he kept the king and the people that he favored, I guess, and the best of the spoil.
Okay, so there's one of the things that he did. He was told to go in and completely annihilate the Amalekites people. They had sinned against Israel previously, and so God was now taking judgment on them. And they were also, they were going to create problems in the future, and because Saul didn't do what he was supposed to do, they do create problems in the future. And so he was told to go in and do that, and yet he kept the best of the animals, and he kept the king. Now, why did he keep the best of the animals? Do you remember? He said he was going to sacrifice them, didn't he? And so in our minds, we think, well, that's a good reason. That's a good reason, right? He's going to offer that sacrifice to God. But that's not what God told him to do. So it's the perfect reminder, a really good reminder for us that you don't get to add in what you think is best. You don't get to, in your mind, come up with a plan and think that it is best. Remember the scripture in Isaiah? Your ways are not my ways. Your thoughts are not my thoughts. I have greater thoughts than you can even imagine. And so here's an example of someone thinking that maybe they could come up with their own plan and do their own thing. And yet God says, no, that is not what I ask you to do. And so I don't remember if we went through the story last week, but Samuel goes in there and sees all these animals that are waiting. And he goes, what have you done? What have you done? You have not done what God asked you to do. Saul tries to make excuses. Oh, what I was going to give it, is the best of the best. I'm going to give it to the Lord. And Samuel goes, what have you done? And he goes over there and does what Saul should have done. He cuts King Agag into pieces, completely destroys him, and slaughters all of the animals that are there. That's what needed to have been done. And so Samuel goes in. In our minds, we look at that situation and you go, what a bloody mess. Why? Why would that happen? You know why it would happen? Because God knew what would happen if it didn't. If it didn't happen. And so it's just the perfect reminder for us to always rely on the plans of God. So now, before we do number 5, I'm going to go ahead and finish doing the teaching on David, because you may come up with some new things if